Hi, everybody. Welcome to Topic 4, Unit 5, South America's Military Regimes. I should forewarn you before I begin that I'm trying a new program out with this one. I'm re-recording here in the fall of 2014, and I've shifted from Screener, which limits me to 5 minutes, to Screencast-O-Matic, which goes a little longer. So if I go past 5 minutes, my apologies and my glee at the same time, because I'm not going to have to rush at the very end. South America experienced a whole run of regimes that fell, regimes of the right, regimes of the left, that fell in the 60s and 70s and were replaced by military dictatorships. Sometimes the militaries intended to come in and rule for a short time and found that they liked ruling and stayed for a long time. Sometimes they came with the intent of staying for a long time themselves. But what happens and what you'll find is that regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on, the right or the left. So we've looked at some leftist regimes, particularly with the Olympics in the last unit. The Russians, for example, the Cubans, for example, from the left, that sort of go past just an ideology and into totalitarianism, controlling everything. In South America, the regimes went to the right. And it does remind me of this joke from South Park from a few years ago where they said, oh, what about a world without religion? What would we fight about? And so you have these different groups of atheists in the future who are fighting against each other. Doesn't matter if you go too far to the right or too far to the left, totalitarian regimes emerge and they frequently turn to sports. So this happened first in Brazil in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The Brazilian military came to power. They came to power to stay. And what's one of the interesting things is that even though they're totalitarian in nature and they want to control all aspects of society, they want to be liked. And so what Brazil did, the Brazilian military did, is they realized that the thing that they had that was liked most of all, both domestically and internationally, was the soccer team. And that you could in fact use the team as its main tool of foreign policy, send them to travel the world and make appearances in all kinds of countries, particularly with Pelé at the helm, and they would be great. They would be seen as great, their country and their regime. And domestically, it would work as well. Their goal, their political ideology was something called grandeza, which means greatness. They wanted to manifest greatness. They wanted Brazil to be great, and they believed that the best way to do that was to show forth strength and success on the soccer field. They wanted to translate into economics. They wanted to translate into a coherent social organization. They wanted to translate into a higher standard of living, but they're going to use the soccer team as the way to put it forward. So in Brazil, the 1970 World Cup team becomes the most famous team in the history of soccer. It storms through the World Cup held in Mexico in 1970, and you'll see a clip here when you watch the bonus bits where they say, "We were the greatest." Not just we, meaning the soccer team, we, the country, we, the regime. They were the greatest because the soccer team was the greatest. And as long as the economy was going well, this worked fine. When they had a crash of the economy in the early 1970s, the sort of ability to manipulate the feelings of the populace based on the soccer team fell away. But there was a heyday where you could do things like have Pele and the team show up in a foreign country and have it help stop sides from fighting in civil wars so that people would come together to come watch this team play, and the manifestation was important. Parallel to that was a regime that came to power in 1973 in Chile. Chile has its own version of September 11th, and when we say remember 11 September in the United States because of the events in 2001, Chileans have been remembering September 11th, good and bad, depending on what part of the political spectrum you're on since then. They had a leftist president named Salvador Allende who ruled in a very democratic fashion, but one that scared some people in the military and frankly in the United States because it was a regime that was outwardly and proudly and avowedly socialist. It was a socialist democracy, which in the United States seemed impossible, but was what was existing. The military staged a coup on September 11, 1973, even bombing the presidential palace. The President Allende was killed, and a fellow here named Augusto Pinochet became the military dictator. He led from 1973 to 1990. He didn't initially set out to politicize soccer right away, but the reality of what he did politicized soccer almost from the beginning. So if you are anywhere, let's pick Moscow. So if you happen to be in Moscow taking this class, and suddenly 10,000 people had to be housed somewhere, where do you keep 10,000 people? Chile arrested 70,000 people in the period of a few days. Where do you put 70,000 people? Where do you process them? And the only answer to that is, if you're in Moscow, it's got to be the Kibi Dome. If you're in Santiago, Chile, the answer is the National Soccer Stadium. They use it as a detention center. They use it as an interrogation center. Frankly, if you're going to beat people and torture people to try and get confessions or learn information from them, it's pretty handy to do it in the large tiled shower areas of a big stadium like this, because you can wash the blood right down the drain. That's horrifying. It's also the reality of how things worked out. In a quirk of World Cup qualifying, the final spot in the World Cup for 1974 came down to a playoff between what is now the very right-leaning Chilean soccer team, Chilean government, Chilean nation, and the Soviet soccer team. The sort of that place was going to go to either Europe or South America. They played in Russia. There was no big result. They were scheduled to play the return game in November 1973 in the Estadio Nacional. The Soviets say, look, we're not going to play. We're not going to play there because that's where our ideological brothers have been imprisoned. And Chile said, look, we'll clean it up. We'll get rid of all the prisoners. It'll look great. When you get there, FIFA sent a delegation. They said, oh, it's not so bad because there's no prisoners there now, and they wanted to go forward with the game. And so the Soviets refused to show up. The Chileans played the game. You can watch a clip of that here in the bonus bits. The Chileans win, and they go to the World Cup, and Pinochet managed to turn this into sort of proof of the victory, of the superiority of the Chilean approach, because the Soviets refused to play. He then turns to one of the things that the other regimes do as well. They sort of adopt certain club teams that are popular and try and identify with them, and it goes on from there. It's this idea that you can, even when you're punishing people's political ideologies, when you're restricting movement in the society, that if you turn to soccer and you sort of play off this populist bent, if you try and make yourself popular that way, that soccer can help you a lot. They weren't the only ones who did it. The Peruvians did it in the 1980s, 70s and 80s. The Argentines did. We'll have the next lecture on that. And it played itself out across the system. Basically, soccer's role in the sports space led unpopular military regimes to create popular appeal. That's the idea. That's the takeaway. So you'll watch that in the bonus bits. You'll read Franklin Foer's article, and then off we go to the next part.